Good morning, everybody. It's Leslie Beyer with the Energy and Transition Podcast, coming to y'all this morning from the Flecha Azul Tequila Studio in Houston. We're so excited about the guest that we have today. It's Kyle Ramachandran, President and CFO at Solaris Oilfield Infrastructure. We are going to have a fantastic conversation kind of around the topics of this podcast, around oil and gas role specifically in energy transition, all of the emerging technologies, the automation, and the emissions reduction that companies in our space are really doing and embracing their role in a lower carbon future. So welcome, Kyle. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Leslie, for having me. Excited to talk about what we'll talk about.
Of course. So you're the third guest.
Okay.
So exciting. We're still kind of...
Third time's a charm.
I know. We're still figuring out exactly how to do all this. But it's been so fun so far, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Great.
So why don't we just start a little bit with your background, kind of how you started and just how Solaris came to be as a company.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm originally from the Northeast, so not from Texas.
So people love you up in the oil field.
Yeah.
You don't have accent like mine.
Yeah. It's been an interesting transition, but I mean, honestly, I've been here in Texas for probably about 6 years, and it's just been great. I don't have any ambitions of going back up Northeast outside of maybe the months of June, July, and August.
Right. It's
every
pretty
summer.
miserable.
It's pretty tough. This year during quarantine, it was really tough. But anyway, grew up in the Northeast, went to college in Boston, started out in finance like a lot of folks do in investment banking.
Mm-hmm.
Spent a couple of years as a generalist, knew that I wanted to transition into private equity. And First Reserve was a large private equity fund that was doing interviews. Energy sounded interesting. It was a global industry. It impacted everybody. It was essential to everything we do. And so much of that is still true today. So I said, that's interesting. I'll go and interview with First Reserve, not knowing a whole lot about the space. Ended up getting an offer to join First Reserve in their Connecticut office and focus on the oilfield services sector. So joined in mid 2009, which was an interesting time. Oil had just rallied to north of $100 oil or WTI, Brent, et cetera. Gas prices were really high.
Yeah.
First Reserve was in a really unique position. They had raised a ton of capital and were putting it all to work. So it was a very exciting time.
And were people like, why are you getting into energy? Why are you getting into oilfield services? Or in that world, did they see that the industry was booming at that moment, and so that made sense?
Yeah, and it was joining a very large bulge bracket private equity fund, which at that time in my career was the ambition. Right? That was the path. I said, I'm going to get into private equity, rise through the ranks, and be a big deal guy on Wall Street.
Yeah.
And it was a great learning experience. I went through a couple workout situations. We had some large investments that were done in 2008 that were probably done on peak earnings with too much debt.
Yeah.
And so learned some of the lessons there about kind of the challenges around leverage in this industry. And not to jump ahead to Solaris, but one of the things we've held core is stay away from leverage because you got to live through the cycles.
You guys have a great balance sheet. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was a really formative period of time in terms of skill sets and sort of rounding out my foundational skills to be a professional. But I knew I kind of wanted to do something different. So I had an opportunity to stay at the fund, but alternatively, there was an opportunity to go to Brazil to join a portfolio company, move to Rio, where I didn't speak any Portuguese.
Yeah.
But just throw myself in the middle of it. Learn what it was like to build an E&P company.
Yes.
Learn a new language, a new culture. I had done OFS mainly at First Reserve, and this was, again, an opportunity to really learn what E&P looked like at the ground level. And I thought that was really important to have that perspective if I wanted a career in energy.
Right.
So I kind of exited my New York apartment with my girlfriend at the time, with my now wife, and we moved to Rio. Yeah. And it was incredible. It was 2011 to 13, 14 timeframe where Brazil had gone through a pretty big boom and was starting to kind of top off. And by the time we left, it really had started to inflect on the way down. And it's been a really rough 7 to 10 years for them. But fantastic experience.
Right.
We drilled some wells offshore, had great success with the drill bit. Looked to market the company, ran into some challenges there with the buyer universe. And it was sort of my first introduction to, you can create a great asset, but if you don't have a deep buyer universe of it, you can kind of get stuck.
Critical.
Yeah. So I knew that was a transition role for me. I wasn't going to live in Brazil forever.
But you always go back for Carnival.
Yeah. Well, I think it's sort of one of those things, you've done it once. You don't need to do it again. If the Cariocas, the people in Rio, they all leave for Carnival.
That's so funny.
They go and, find something a little more quiet. It's a cultural experience. We lived on a 4th floor apartment and it's a full week.
Yeah.
The first day of Carnival, we went somewhere for a big party and whatnot. So we had a long night. 8 a.m., we just hear doom, 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 doom. It just keeps getting louder and louder and louder. And, a half hour later, sure enough, we look down and we have this great photo with our street and it's just jam packed, for as long as you can see, just people.
And all dressed in parade.
And having a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's what it's like in DC during inauguration week, just in case you ever wondered.
Okay. I try to stay away from that.
Yeah, we all rent our houses out on that week.
Okay. Yeah. No, exactly. Carnival, if you have an apartment on the beach in Rio, you can generate some good cash flow.
Yeah.
So anyway, I knew I wanted to get back to the U.S., came back to Houston. So I'd lived in New York really for 4 or 5 years, Rio for a couple of years, and then moved back to Houston without really any roots, but knew that this was the place to be for the next stage.
Space.
And I really hadn't paid all that much attention to the shales because I was down in Brazil and that was all offshore.
Oh, yeah.
Massive projects. Our wells were $150 to $200 million wells, right? It's just a completely different ballgame. But I knew there was a big thing going on in the US. And so I just kind of networked and got introduced to Bill Zartler, who is one of the founders of Denim Capital. Bill had a kind of a mix of private equity, entrepreneurship, and operating business experience. I thought it was really unique. And he was at a point in his career where he wanted to find a couple of deals, build companies, and build a team around it. And it seemed to be very synergistic with me, where I had some skills, but was looking to get more experience and found somebody who, I thought would do that for me. But I didn't commit until, because Bill, he's got a lot of these entrepreneurs in the oil and gas industry, a lot of ideas. And what you don't want to do is commit to something like that, look up 2 years later, and you actually haven't done anything. Like you've looked at a lot of things. So I said, once you write your first check to be committed to something, I'm in. So he did, called me back.
Wow.
And I was in.
Was he like, you damn millennial?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. And he kind of kids me for it now because it's, 6-7 years later.
Yes.
But that was in early 14. So again, back to $100 oil and things are great. And we're going to raise all this capital and we're going to build all these companies. And we got our first deal going, which ultimately is the company that the public company we're running today. And again, it was 500 frac crews, 2,000 rigs, times were good. And we had a niche product technology that had been developed and we were going to build a rental business around it. So it was an interesting time to start because we were looking at an addressable market that was very large and we didn't need a big piece of it to be successful. Sure enough, fast forward 12 months later and the world is completely, not even 12, more like 10, 6 months later. The world's completely changed. The Saudis come out and they say they're going to put the pedal to the metal and more production after Thanksgiving in 14 and oil craters. And so we go through the first real cycle that I've kind of been through. But thankfully, we raised all equity capital. There was no debt. We had our own money, friends and family, and a very supportive sponsor that said, look, we're just going to be patient and we're going to push this technology. We think it's got benefits that allow operators to do more at lower prices, which became a theme that's played out really well, right? If you can find ways to help them operate in a lower cost environment, you can win.
And that has been the case for the past few years.
Exactly. So in a weird way, that downturn really played into our hand and allowed us to build the business. So that was, 14, 15, 16 was all about trying to push a new product and develop and learnings from, you put something out and you learn a lot. So you got to keep going back to the drawing board and keep iterating. So that was pretty foundational. The other thing we did early 2016, we realized, and this was sort of at the real bottom, oil got down to mid 20s, decided to start another business, which is when we started the midstream business. So we've got Solaris Oilfield Infrastructure, which is a rental equipment business where we manufacture it ourselves, service it, et cetera, for completions. And then we started a midstream business, which is focused on produced water management, whether that be transfer, disposal, recycling, sending it back. But we did that because we felt like there weren't people paying attention to it. The Delaware Basin was going to have high water cuts, or it did have high water cuts, and you needed different infrastructure. Just like on the sand side, what we identified was the old infrastructure, which is old technology, just didn't work for today's frac. Right. Not only the amount of sand per lateral foot, but the number of stages per day were going up, the number of pads or wells per pad were going up. So the infrastructure needed to change. And I think what we've been able to identify is trends, and then what infrastructure is fit for that trend and how can we play a part of it. So getting back to it, we kind of had those both going in parallel in 16. Timing is everything. Late 16, capital markets really started to open up. Keene was and now NexTier was the first real U.S. oriented completion business to go public. They did it in January, but they came out with their initial S1, I want to say December, November. And Bill and I got it and we said, wow, why don't we do this for SOI? We needed growth capital. We had a backlog of orders from customers for new equipment. We had access to our own equity from the private equity sponsor, but there was more attractive capital in the public markets. And those windows open and close very quickly.
Right. They're closed right now.
Exactly. Yeah. We're definitely faced with that today. So early January of 17, we hired some lawyers and some banks, and we got everyone in a room. And 3 weeks later, we had our first S1. Very compressed timeline, but we knew we just had to go. We had a simple story, and we had to go. So that was mid-January. By mid-May, we were public. So very compressed timeline. And we kind of were one of the last few companies to get out in that early 17 window, which really set us up with a bunch of growth capital. We didn't need to touch the debt capital markets. So from 17 to 19, it was just growth. We went from, call it 20 systems to today we've got 160. We grew by roughly 8 times. And the market obviously grew a lot in that period of time as well. And now we're much lower than we were in late 16-ish. So it's been kind of round, it's come full circle. But those 3 years are really just growth and execution. And now we find ourselves in, well, what do we do next? You know, we've got great market share. We've got a great balance sheet. We've got great products. But at the end of the day, if we just stay complacent, we're probably going to see not a whole lot of growth just from the market. So we've got to find different ways to evolve and grow.
Well, I think that is a challenge that we face across OFS. You know, we have basically become so efficient that we've gotten our margins down to a razor thin line, and we have to be able to keep executing, even though that the productivity level has definitely gone down. But that is a huge challenge. And I think what we're talking about now, especially in this post-pandemic environment, how so much has changed with our workforce, but also with the digital revolution and how everything is really changing to automation and ROI and machine learning.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that as far as like what Solaris is doing in that space? I know a lot of your products have that built in, and that's where you're innovating to go next.
Yeah. And I think what's key there is a spirit around continued innovation. You know, in 14, when we started, it was about different steel, right? We created a different kind of steel, not actual steel, but a different product, physical product that changed the way people were working. In the last few years, it's been more about how do we make it sticky? How do we make it more than just a steel? How do we make it the sensor that drives your entire supply chain rather than it's just where I store sand and chemicals and water?
Right.
It's actually the most critical junction that then drives a bunch of decisions upstream of it prior to getting on location. So that is a fundamental strategy is core. And the way we've done that is by implementing the right sensors, the right reliability, the right communication from a data stream standpoint, getting it up to the cloud, getting it up into our customers' operating centers, integrating with their dashboards. Because the last thing people ultimately need is another app. People want it easy. So you've got to take the extra step to say, okay, here's my data that's available. I know you are looking at other screens. How do I integrate with what you have to allow you to use your machine learning to make better decisions?
That's an interesting concept because I see a lot of people saying we're rolling this out and use our app and, but
it's challenging. We've seen it. We rolled out our app probably in 2016 and it's been a long campaign. You've got to constantly educate people on it and eventually you do get there. But the notion that one can just roll out an app and even if it does have perceived value, there's a bit of momentum you've got to overcome for that individual. You got to make it easy. So one of the things we've done actually with the physical equipment is implemented technology, which is software and hardware to automate the delivery of sand into the blender. So historically, going back 4 or 5 years, sand was delivered to location into multiple different containers, which were then individually operated. There was no central operating system. So you had multiple people running it. We solved that by putting one system in place. Everything goes into that system. It's operated by one individual. What we developed in early 19 was what we call Auto Hopper, which automates the delivery of sand into the blender where it's ultimately consumed based on the actual pull-through rate of the blender. So in other words, it used to be a guy who would look into a hopper and say, I need to speed up, I need to slow down, I got to maintain that. It's almost like an I Love Lucy, like, where she's speeding it up, slowing, it's gone too fast, now it's overfilling, right?
Yes.
So by integrating with the technology that's already out there, the blender and its controls, we've been able to eliminate the person that was sitting over that job and maybe not eliminate them, but get them into a role that they're now adding more value.
That's an important part of that.
Exactly.
The evolution of our workforce.
Exactly.
To these types of
those
jobs.
Individuals would have been doing a very monotonous task. Right. They can now skill up and start adding more value to their employer and their customer.
Right.
So it's a mix of, I would say, like pure data, just collecting data, but it's also how do you make the system run more efficiently, more simple. And when we look at the R&D and development of what we've got going on now, like sort of 2020 R&D for Solaris, it's around new equipment that further streamlines and automates processes that, quite frankly, are just antiquated.
Right.
And there's just been not a lot of momentum to change. If we look at the well site today, the drilling side, they've advanced so much, right? I mean, I don't know the drilling side quite as well, but if they had 20 people today, they've got 3 or 4. And the number of days to drill a well has come down just significantly. Completion side has been a little bit slower. We've obviously seen a ton of development on the electric fleets, which we play a part in by our equipment being 100% electric.
I wanted to ask you about that because I know your equipment can tie into all of that. And the electrification of the oil field is so important right now as we talk about reducing environmental footprint.
It's environmental footprint, but it's also cost, right? If you're an operator and you're watching associated gas get flared, or you're not getting a whole lot out of it when you send it down the pipeline, down to the refinery to get to, or to the gas processing plant to get sold, you may have better value in using that gas to run your process. So it sort of just makes sense. And so we've always been 100% electric, and that was driven around reliability. So ESG is an interesting thing because and the way we kind of think about it is do what makes sense and what's right. It's probably going to tie pretty well to ESG.
It is. And it's going to tie back to your financials in a positive way too.
Exactly. And so like the fundamentals of what we've been able to do from an environmental standpoint is we've reduced the footprint. We've reduced the carbon emissions. We've reduced the people required. We've reduced the trips to location. And those were all in some ways financially and market driven. Like we knew we could have a good business by doing that. And it turns out they're great for ESG as well. And without that, we'd be kind of scratching our head with, oh no, we gotta really come up with something here.
Well, it's interesting because I see a lot of companies that are like, well, how do we begin to approach ESG? And it's almost like, first of all, you wrap it around your mind that this is just a way of doing business.
It is.
That also leads to the cost reduction. But as long as we're talking about that, so from the CFO perspective,
right.
ESG metrics, how do you look at that across the enterprise and say, okay, how this impacts our access to capital markets? We talked about that, and our investability.
Yeah, you have to have an ESG story that's just full stop. And I think it goes back to wrap your mind around that you need to have one and just start to think about what that really means. ESG has got multiple components, but if you think of the S and G, on the S, do you take care of your people? Do you take care of your communities? Do you take care of your customers? Do you look at your sourcing strategy? Are you being logical about it? If you're going around and you're not putting people in a safe work environment, if you're not giving them opportunities to learn, they're not going to stick around. So that's just not good business. From a G standpoint, a governance standpoint, our fundamental tenet has been the best governance is to have management with significant skin in the game. And that's the way both of our businesses started. Mm-hmm. We wrote checks to buy the first piece of equipment. We wrote checks to put the first piece of pipeline in place. And that just creates a alignment where it's not, what is my salary this year? What's my bonus this year? It's how do we create an enterprise that's worth a lot more than we've invested? That's how we really incentivize governance. That drives good decision-making. We're not chasing growth because we have a compensation metric that says if I have 25% annual revenue growth, I get a big bonus or I get a bunch of stock. We just want to create equity value, which is really translated into earnings, sustainability of those earnings. And now what are you doing from an ESG standpoint? Not only because the investing community wants to see it, but they recognize that the operators are going to force it. So if you don't have that in your toolkit, you're going to be in some trouble. So from a CFO standpoint, the other component of it is measuring it. If you were a new company and you were like, where do I start from? Just start measuring. Mm-hmm. Measure your truck emissions. Measure how you're manufacturing your equipment. Where are you sourcing the water from? What sorts of renewable sources of energy are you using, or in your mix, or just tracking it provides the baseline, and then from the baseline you can really start to improve. And what investors are looking for is on the ESG side, and we can get in this a little bit, is a tell me story. Tell me what you're going to do. Nobody expects those involved in producing hydrocarbons in North America today to be carbon neutral tomorrow. It's sort of a realistic ambition. So as long as you're kind of working towards something and you're continuing to progress, I think you'll get interest. But if you kind of turn your eyes or close your eyes to it, you're going to have an uphill battle with the investing community.
I agree. And I mean, just wrapping your mind around the fact that we aren't going to go from 0 to 60 overnight. I mean, we were just chatting when we sat down about the new regs out in California on, cars.
We will not have internal combustion engines mandated by the government, which is just it's just an interesting concept to get your head wrapped around.
It is, because we know, those of us in the industry know what we do to actually reduce emissions and how important, especially natural gas, is to the overall mix. One of the things that I really focus on and hope that the reach of this podcast is able to make some penetration on is the fact that it is a mix, and the mix is regionally specific. It matters.
Yes.
In some places in rural Africa, solar is what's going to work.
Right.
And in some places, hydro is what's going to work. But we are not going to pull oil and gas out of that mix when there are so many emerging non-OECD populations that require that to live. And we just don't get that message out enough. But I hope that stories, like these from Solaris and everything that you guys are doing and everything that we're doing as a sector, especially to reduce emissions on behalf of our customers, which at the end of the day is also an important piece of that. We talked about BP and some others announcing their carbon goals, and that's fantastic. But then they turn right around to their suppliers and say, right, how are you going to get me there?
Absolutely.
And I think that's a really important part of the Solaris story too, because y'all give full visibility down the supply chain. That's an important part of ESG.
Absolutely.
Is being able to say as an operator, I know exactly where all this is coming from. I know what the metrics are, environmental, social, and governance on all of this down through my supply chain.
It's the new price of entry. You've got to have it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the Show Me and all of that. Explain kind of your experience in that as you grew into shale and kind of started getting into that business.
Yeah, and I'm paraphrasing and I stole the concept from somebody, but it really resonated with me. If we go back, say 10 years ago, plus or minus, the shale revolution in the U.S. was very much a tell me story. Tell me what you're going to do. Tell me about this new play you just developed that I've never heard of, and how great the economics are, and how you're not paying too much for acreage, and you're going to be able to bring your well cost down, and your productivity on those wells are going to go up. So just tell me, and here's the money. I believe in you. You're gonna do it.
Isn't that a crazy way to
But it's the way capital markets work. Like, you won't find a great investment if you're not willing to believe somebody who's telling you something, because if it's known and it's already happening, it may not be a great investment, because where's the growth from?
Valid.
So I think, capital markets drove capital into the oil and gas sector in the last 10 years because of the tell me piece of it. And then the belief in the cyclicality of the industry. There will be peaks and opportunities to buy in at good times. So a lot of capital came into the space to drive. I mean, we went from 5 or 6 million barrels a day to the US to double that, right? I mean, that didn't happen with a lot of capital and a lot of tell me, but it was a show me, because companies did significantly improve and increase their production in the US. And I mean, let's not forget, we went from importing, whatever it was, 14 million barrels a day to now less than 10, right? So that's a pretty significant shift on developing the independence of America, which I think is important
to our national security.
And I think we're certainly seeing it with COVID, our reliance on the global supply chain and the inherent risks in that, for a number of reasons. But what has happened in the shale plays is we've now transitioned to an actual show me. Capital markets are shut off. We all acknowledge that. You've got to live within cash flow. And so now investors are saying, show me you can sustainably run your business, generate more operating cash flow than the CapEx that's required to maintain that operating cash flow. And you're going to generate free cash flow. And then you're going to have capital return to me as an investor. So once you start to do that in the show me story, I think capital returns in some way. Because if we look at the capital markets today, all of the capital is being driven to the tell me stories in the tech world. And there's a lot of excitement there. There's a lot of opportunities. Snowflake was a company that recently went public, and their model is, we're just going to integrate all this stuff you do. And the equity markets are saying, that's a huge opportunity, right? Somebody that can make it easy. And just like we were talking about with the operators and feeding them data, it's a huge opportunity. Now they're telling me story, because they haven't done a ton of it. They've got some growth, but they're not profitable. They're a long way from profitable, but people are believing it. And I think there's some truth to it. We've just got to get people back into our space, because we are a mature company, our mature industry that's generating sustainable cash flow in an ESG friendly way. And then I think that's when things get a little bit better.
I agree. It's going to improve our access not only to the capital markets, but also to the talent that we're going to need to get us to the next level. We talked a little bit about that, but we're going to have to do so much reskilling, and we're going to have to really get comfortable with the fact that our workforce is going to be smaller, just because we're relying so much more on automation. But how are we going to attract, I mean, you're very humble about your background, but how are we going to attract people like you from, Harvard and all of these to come into
I'm not a Harvard guy, but Boston College,
but to come back into our industry, how are we going to attract that kind of interest?
I've thought about it, and it's sort of a bad way to think about it in some ways, but get them while they're young.
Yeah.
You've got to get them hooked early. You've got to get people thinking about the narrative differently than what they're getting, say, in mainstream media. And so I think that's the big challenge. So historically, the large OFS companies were out on campuses doing a ton of recruiting. And I haven't followed as well. I'm sure they're doing recruiting, but I'm sure the numbers are down. But companies like Solaris are and need to continue to be more at the forefront of those universities to get that young talent into internship programs. Introduce them to, you can actually come here and you may have a ton of perspective that somebody like me who's been in the industry for 15 years doesn't have, and you can completely change the way I've been thinking about something. We hired somebody recently, recent MBA from UT, and I said, here's a bunch of data. We don't know what to do with this. Just play around with it. And he knew a programming language that I didn't know existed. Yeah. And he came back in a matter of, 3 or 4 hours with the work product that would have taken me several days in Excel. And so it's out there. And he's an engineer and a great guy that wants to be in this space, and he loves it. But we got lucky there. We've got to get those sort of characters, guys like Sujit, in their early days and get them here, show them that they can have an impact. They can actually design something, see it in the field, make it happen, add value. So you got to get them early, and you got to get them excited about the positive side of it, rather than a narrative that hydrocarbons are evil.
Or going away.
Exactly. Yeah. The other narrative is, why would I get a career in hydrocarbons when everything's going to be solar and wind, in a matter of days, right? I mean, there's certainly
which is laughable
narrative. Yeah, exactly. So it's a marketing and education campaign. I think you and I may have been at something, a breakfast last year where it was mentioned that we don't have the right marketing in our industry. We hire the wrong sort of folks that are saying that the oil and gas companies need to be producing green algae, right? That's sort of like one of the large E&Ps that's been their marketing spiel for a long time. And there are individuals, I'll mention Chris Wright at Liberty in our space who do a tremendous job of promoting and giving the right data. And we just need more of that.
We do. I think that's going to have to be a requirement of our leaders,
yes,
because we will not be able to attract those folks. And, another important part of ESG, especially under governance, is our culture.
Yes.
I've been out to those tech companies, and, my husband worked for a while at Facebook, and he was like, Leslie, there is a woodworking shop right around the corner. If you just kind of get stuck on your work and you want to go work on some cabinets for a minute, like you walk around the corner, you get a free lunch and do some woodworking. And, we don't, not that we need that because we're trying to get business done.
Yeah.
But how are we going to become more attractive? You mentioned Chris Wright at Liberty. I've heard stories of the amazing culture that they have and how they treat their employees.
Right.
How are we going to create that culture in the oil field? I know I, as a woman, find myself, definitely the only person of my gender in a lot of meetings.
Sure.
Did you face that coming in as a younger person? People are like, well, you're a president CFO. You can't obviously know as much as I do. What was your experience with that?
Yeah, no, there's no doubt that there's not a stigma, but that we've not done a great job of balancing the recruiting. Now, I will say that I'm proud of what we've been able to do at Solaris. When I kind of pull up our management page on the website, I do find it to be quite balanced. And that was one of Bill's early fundamental tenets was, let's bring multi-skilled in here. Let's not just bring the guys that have been doing and gals that have been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years. We need some of that, obviously. But where we've really found innovation has been through those that haven't been out to a well site very often. So a little anecdote, we were talking to a company that's developed a new piece of technology recently, and we met their engineer who'd done it, 26-year-old guy. He was an intern at the company during college, joined, had really no field experience. And they said, here's a problem. We want to do this process, but we don't know how to make it happen. Go and figure it out. He's a mechanical engineer. So he knew how to kind of figure it out, but wasn't kind of, didn't have the biases associated with, well, this is the way I've done it for so long. So you got to be willing as the individual who's either younger or a different gender or whatever it may be to put yourself out there, because the opportunities are there, but you got to take some ownership of it. They're not necessarily going to be handed to you, because you're right. It's not always going to go to you because you may not fit the mold of what people are looking for. But I think culture is key. And for us, it's been about entrepreneurism. It's been a big thing we've driven into culture. And we've been able to pull people out of larger organizations with that core tenet. So if you're an engineer at a large equipment company, you have to go through months and months of process just to get approval to pursue something. With us, it's walk down the hall. You got a good idea. Makes sense. Let's go try it. We're going to be, I'm the CFO on it. We're going to be balanced in how much money we spend on it, but let's go try stuff. The Facebook mantra is move fast and break things. And it's oil and gas sector. So we have to be careful about breaking things because there's an element of safety involved. But I think we've got to
breaking molds for sure.
Yeah. And we've got to be open to learn from those others, right? The other cultures and businesses. I think COVID has done a good job of educating all of us. Certainly the oil and gas industry was slower to adopt, I would say, just remote working relative to other industries. Certainly the tech industry, people have been working remote for years. And I think there's great value in it because from an employee recruitment standpoint, you can provide flexibility. If you've got a doctor appointment or you got a kid issue, work from home. But we're going to give you the tools that allow you to be productive, and we're going to hold you accountable to be productive in that environment. Working from home is no longer a sort of blow-off day, right? It means you're really working.
That's right.
So we were slower to do that, and I think we've now all had to adopt to that. But what I do think we are struggling with is the innovation piece, not only internally, but also with the industry. You've got to be in front of your customers. You've got to be with your colleagues. You've got to be with your industry partners, even things like PISA meetings, right? It's
been tough.
It's tough. Zoom it's a good tool, But to rely on it for 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day for 5 days a week, it's tough. And I'm not convinced we've figured out how to create the same level of original thought. I think we can get process done via that, but I'm not sure we brainstorm quite as well.
Oh, I agree with that 100%. I've been preaching that. And it is a good tool. If there's a project that's already ongoing and everyone on the team already knows each other, great. Right. We can get it executed that way. But as far as innovation and strategy around, what you need to do to change things, which we're all having to do right now,
absolutely,
it's difficult to do it that way. And there's a lot of value to being in a room. And we can do that now. We can do it safely.
Right.
But, there's just special hurdles around that. But thanks for bringing up the PISA piece. We have actually just transitioned all of our certification programs. So we have executive coaching, ESG, D&I programs that people were in the middle of. And we had to transition all of that content to remote.
Right.
And I've been shocked at how effective that it actually has been because you are able to do some targeted networking and breakout rooms and things like that, which, okay, that's cool. You also can reach a global audience.
Sure.
There were people from Dubai in the D&I session that I was in yesterday that could not have been there had, it been down the street necessarily. So that you can appreciate. But I agree with you. It has been a challenge on moving forward. But I do think that it's been good for the industry to try and embrace that a little more. We've had a hard time retaining women that, historically need more flexibility because they're either taking care of an elderly parent or they have kids at home.
Right.
That they're oftentimes, primarily responsible for. And I like to see our industry moving that way. It's going to take that. And the more that we can talk about how we're focusing on our culture and changing our culture to embrace people of entirely different backgrounds is only going to benefit us. But we simultaneously have to be talking about what we're doing for the environment too, right? And how we're not ever going away. So I think it's a tough road ahead for us, but I hope that more leaders, and like you mentioned, like with Bill and like with Chris Wright, can really stand up and be like, hey, I'm not going to focus just on the weeds of the business all the time. I am going to take a leadership role and really kind of try and get some visibility for what we do. Because Oilfield Services, man, we got a great story. And there's a lot of innovation happening across the industry.
Absolutely.
But really from Oilfield Services, that's where the tech comes from. So I love to hear that story from Solaris and everything that y'all are working on the tech and on ESG and the leaders you've been in the space. So back to topic of being home during quarantine.
Yes.
You've had an exciting quarantine.
Yes.
I thought mine was exciting because I moved, but you've actually added a member of the family, which is awesome.
Yes.
How has that been for you and Tiffany, and let's talk a little bit about your amazing wife, who also, when y'all moved to Houston, has done so much professionally. She really
she's a little entrepreneur. Yep.
She is.
Yep.
So tell me a little about y'all's quarantine experience.
Yeah, the first 3 or 4 months was great because it was a lot of extra time with a 14 to 18-month-old.
Yeah.
And it's just such a cool transition age, and they're just into everything. And so that was just really, really special. But sort of midway through, we introduced our daughter Paige in July. So we've now got 202 during quarantine.
Yeah.
I'm going to get a t-shirt made.
202.
But it's been amazing. Again, I go back to, we're going to find ways going forward for people to have better balance in their life. And I think they're going to be more productive. One of the things I've done in quarantine is figured out ways to cut sort of the things in the day that really aren't driving a lot of value. And you've got to be willing to just not check email quite as frequently during times where you really want, if you got 2 or 3 things you really want to get done, get those done before you get into that churn. You wake up, you flip open your computer, you're lost for the day.
I know.
Right? You're just in the churn. So I think quarantine has helped us get more disciplined in that, because you know that I can finish what I'm doing and I can go hang out with the kids for a half hour before that next call. And that's really valuable and special. So that's been great. No doubt the challenges, again, have been from just as a leader creating an environment that still has the same feel for everybody. And we've tried Zoom happy hours, and we've tried, the book club, and we've tried different special interest groups. And it's been tough. So I think you made a point, can we do this safely? And I think, the answer is yes, with the right protocol in place. And so we've done some strategy meetings, and we'll continue to do that, just again, with the right spacing and giving people, their fresh air, if you will. And I think, but we can't avoid it and be afraid of coming back to some level of normal, because we really need it.
We do.
For our health, for the health of our businesses, et cetera.
And for our economy.
Yes.
That was the last thing I wanted to ask you about. So, we have got to get our economy back on track, and it's going to require demand going back up. So what do you, hear? What do you see from the analysts? What's your, kind of best guess at what we're looking at next year?
Well, more than anything, I believe in the human spirit to get things done and figure out solutions to problems. So clearly COVID is a big challenge. I think we've mitigated a lot of it in terms of the protocols we've put in place. You go on a well site today, and those well sites are operating. They're just with different protocols. So that hasn't stopped. You go to restaurants and they're operating. The notion of everyone going to a bar for 6 hours on a Saturday night, and maybe that wasn't good for any of us, and glad those days are behind me. But so we don't have that, but we can get still a lot done. And so that part of human innovation, but then, from a cure or a vaccine or whatever it is, I'm confident that we've got the brightest minds in the world getting after that are going to find a way. So we will get back to a new normal. And we'll look back at this as a really challenging time, but a lot we learned and we got better for it. So, from an overall supply demand function in the world, I think there's a couple narratives. One is continued efficiencies. So, a barrel of oil is going longer now because engines are more efficient, et cetera. So we'll have that kind of headwind. But we can't deny the tailwind of the emerging middle class in places like China and India and Brazil and Africa. They want access to cheap, affordable, clean energy. And I think we can just be a really critical component to that. And we can't lose sight of that. We've got to be proud of what we've been able to do in the US. And there is a narrative that it's evil. And I don't think that's accurate. I think there's always a trade-off in anything you do in life. And so there's nothing that's pure altruistic. And you may have altruistic ambitions, but there's a cost to it. The renewables are not carbon neutral. They may be carbon neutral when they're running, but the notion of carbon neutral from start to finish is not there.
Their supply chain definitely relies on hydrocarbons and petrochemicals, 100%.
Exactly. And so there's no perfect solution. And I think a balance of renewables is great. And I think Texas has done a great job of it. What we haven't done is eliminated the backup, if you will, natural gas and hydrocarbon-based sources like we've done in other states. And now, the notion that we're going to be green, but we're going to cut people's electricity off in the heat of the summer, which is going to cause, people to be sick or
especially lower income.
Exactly.
Who are affected disproportionately on
right.
that.
And you think about the economy getting back, lower energy prices will drive a stronger economy because people will have more discretionary income to spend more, they'll use more, et cetera. So it's got that flywheel effect. So I'm confident we'll get back there. I'm confident people will be getting back on airplanes. I don't know when. And it's going to be kind of a rough period of time here. The operators have reduced supply, which is healthy. And capital markets are saying, we're not going to give you any more money to ramp up. So, quite frankly, I think there's a pretty strong conviction around a tightness at some point in the global oil market because supply is coming down and it just doesn't turn on overnight. And I think there's a belief that demand will come back. Now, there's certainly people talking about, will we get back to 100 million barrels a day of oil in the world being consumed? And maybe not, because there's a balance of people working from home versus everyone commuting, but it certainly will be higher than it is today. So I'm ambitious, or I'm excited about it. And I believe in the future of our industry to play a big part in providing what we've been able to do over the last 100 years, which is increasing the quality of life for the world. And I think we've got to be confident that that's what we're doing, and we got to continue to get better. Can't be complacent about it, but we can't be afraid or shy of who we are.
I agree with that 100%. That's a great positive note to end it on. Kyle Ramachandran, thank you so much for your leadership. Appreciate you being on the advisory board at PISA. We are so grateful to have leaders like yourself and for everything y'all are doing at Solaris, and say hi to Bill for us.
Will do. And thanks, Leslie, and everything PISA does. You're kind of a hero to a lot of us because you guys keep us going. In COVID, I think there could have been organizations like PISA that just sort of disappeared. Internally, people wouldn't have been asking, where's PISA? Where's PISA? And you guys are pushing a lot. And I think that's what the stronger organizations need to do and will do to be successful. So thank you for that.
I appreciate you saying that. Anybody else with wonderful feedback and positive comments for us on the podcast too, please reach out to Leslie at energyandtransition.org. We'll sign off for this afternoon. Thanks again, Kyle. And thank you to everybody for listening.